Live from our hurricane headquarters with real-time analysis from some of the nation's top meteorologists, this is Tracking the Tropics, powered by Bose Electric.
Right on cue, the tropics are heating up as we approach the peak hurricane season. There are quite a few areas that we are monitoring out there in the Atlantic, the Gulf. Of course, most eyes, though, at this point on newly formed Tropical Storm Erin. Welcome into this edition of Tracking the Tropics. I'm meteorologist Amanda Hawley, joined here by meteorologist Juliana Mejia. And of course, we have a featured guest meteorologist this week, as we always do. Our featured meteorologist this week comes from KXAN in Austin, Texas, a friend of the program, meteorologist Kristen Currie. Thanks for joining us, guys.
Good morning, lady.
Good morning. Lots to get to on this edition of Tracking the Tropics. All eyes have been on Erin. There's a lot of social media buzz on this tropical system. We're going to be answering your questions throughout this episode as well. So make sure you're using the hashtags, the hashtag Hey Amanda, hashtag Hey Kristen, and hashtag Hey Juliana. And we will be getting to those questions. We're going to be throwing them up on screen, specifically looking at those comment sections on Facebook and TikTok here. So make sure you're commenting there. But I do want to throw it on over to Juliana. We've got the latest track in on Tropical Storm Erin, forecast to be our first major hurricane of the season, Juliana.
Exactly. Yes. And like you said, very much a focus right now for many folks, I'm sure, on social media and just in general. I wanted to touch on, these two other areas, this X here in the North Gulf. That's just an area of low pressure, this surface trough that the National Hurricane Center just indicated could be some issues that come from that along the Gulf Coast and flooding wise. But this also disturbance here in the Northwest Atlantic, also not really an issue. This has very low end chances of development, if developing at all. So we're going to focus on Erin still today. So on the 11 a.m. cone, the latest from the National Hurricane Center, 45-mile-per-hour winds still trucking along here, moving fairly fast west at 23 miles per hour. And that movement actually did kind of hinder the convection with Erin a little bit. It's something they noted in the discussion, that it's a little sloppier in terms of what the convection is looking like. Also, it did dip just a touch to the south. So now that's reflected in the cone, sitting a little farther south than the last cone. However, key things to note is that they still keep very slow strengthening, and really not much strengthening through the next day or so. It's until we look really to Friday and into this upcoming weekend for then that potential hurricane status, and then eventually, still in the forecast, is major hurricane status as we work our way into this weekend, Saturday and Sunday in particular. So here's a look at what I was mentioning here. That slight southern kind of touch here, as well as you can see how much more robust the convection previously was compared to now in these last few hours. But that isn't, necessarily going to be an issue for Erin. There's a number of environmental factors. There's not as favorable water temperatures in the eastern Atlantic right now. We'll look at that here in just a moment, but I wanted to get a closer look at the cone to also point out that now the cone does encompass portions of the Virgin Islands, portions of Puerto Rico. So these areas right now, it's too early to know exactly what kind of impacts to expect, and especially for how these areas are at this point just barely within the cone, but interests in these areas. If you know people traveling to those areas heading into this weekend, you'll want to keep a close eye on the forecast. Otherwise, here's the good news, still consistently with the spaghetti models and still consistently with the trends that we've seen in models for days now, is as we look out about a week, eventually still reflecting a turn to the north. As we look out that long range 10 days, still consistent as well. And part of that is because of the steering pattern, and what we're now monitoring is the subtropical ridge kind of elongated across the Atlantic, but eventually giving way and kind of parting here, allowing for Erin, especially as the subtropical ridge here over the eastern Atlantic weakens, and it looks to weaken a little bit. That will allow for Erin to take that eventual turn, which is something we're going to be keeping a very close eye on here for the next couple of days. That is also still reflected in the European versus the American with their long-term forecasts as well. Both of them, while yes, slightly different, both of them taking that turn. So these are all good signals that we like to see. Here's a look at the track once more, just to compare and really show you the reason for the strengthening towards the second half still of the forecast period, is because it will be washing over some much more warmer sea surface temperatures come Friday into Saturday, which will just allow for that faster and stronger strengthening period as we look to Saturday and into Sunday. And that's also reflected now. This is yesterday's intensity model plots 24 hours ago, 12Z yesterday compared to now, where more of these models, and you can see, take this into the next 3.5 to 4 days or so, taking us into a good, a little more than half of them into category 1 hurricane status, and eventually a good chunk of these continued strengthening through the end of the forecast period. So all plenty of good things to be monitoring for now. But, keep reiterating that we're not hyping up the system, and we're not trying to get anybody hyped up about it, just giving you the latest information.
Yeah, we certainly have a long time to watch this system, and I know that every single forecast cone that comes out will get posted on social media. Every single model run will be posted on social media as well. So don't overexert yourself by looking at all of these models. Kristen, I know that you dive into this as well by, keeping everyone calm. It's really important. We've got a long ways to watch this. What are your thoughts on Erin?
Yeah, I think it's definitely going to be a storm that is paid attention to by everybody. Kind of like what Julianne was saying. I like where this is going. I like the fact that it's not necessarily in a very conducive environment right now for rapid intensification. We'll slowly get there. I am pretty convinced that this is definitely going to be our first hurricane of the Atlantic season. And that typically comes, on the 11th of August. So we're not too far away from that date being yesterday. So this is expected, I think. Nothing is giving me any red flags. I agree with Julianne, that slight southerly jog of the track, putting some of those Caribbean islands, some of the greater Antilles into that kind of uncertainty bears monitoring. But as far as, the eastern seaboard of the United States, given the data that I was looking at this morning and from the National Hurricane Center update too, it does look like this is going to take that westerly curve of that ridge of high pressure out east and then curve north and northwest, which would be very good news for the U.S. So there's plenty of time to watch it, which is also nice. This isn't going to sneak up on us, and it's also, we're given the luxury of this being the only strong system out there, and we don't have competing systems to draw our attention or distract us from. So I'm agreeing with everything that y'all are saying back there.
And again, we are going to be taking your questions here on this episode of Tracking the Tropics. So make sure you're using those hashtags on the bottom of your screen. You'll see them eventually there. Hey, Amanda. Hey, Juliana. And hey, Kristen. We'll be popping those questions up on the screen and answering them to the best of our ability. Like we have all reiterated, we've got a lot of time to watch this. I think a lot of folks are going to see this storm move west and farther west and keep coming west. And on Sunday, it's still going to be heading west. But Sunday and into Monday is going to be the time frame that we're going to be watching for that turn to the north. And we do have decent confidence at the moment, right? We have had a lot of forecast model runs that show that curve to the north. So if we see any major changes and any major shifts in the forecast models, we'll be watching for those trends. But at the moment, it's just going to be a long time to kind of keep and wait and see and watch this slowly strengthen. Juliana, you mentioned it that, we're not going to see a whole lot over the next 24 hours. So if you put your phone down for 24 hours, it's not going to be a big deal because we're not going to see it strengthen a whole lot. It's not over significantly warm waters. It's dealing with some winds and some dry air at the moment as well. But beyond that, you're going to start to see Tropical Storm Erin strengthened. Erin becomes hurricane. You'll see those headlines for sure. But, that's just part of hurricane season. We are entering the peak hurricane season now. So this is not unexpected either for us to see these storms developing. But this one, again, like Kristen said, has kind of all of our attention right now. Juliana, you've been tracking this as well. What are your thoughts moving forward and what should be people be focusing on as we go into the rest of the work week here until Friday?
Yeah, I think it's a delicate balance is what I've actually, we've been talking about here in the station at the studio is we're keeping you informed. We want to give you the latest, By delicate balance, I mean of, especially for now, areas like Puerto Rico and areas like the Virgin Islands, it's a casual monitoring. It's not freaking out about it because, we don't want to there's mixed emotions towards it, and especially like comments that I'm getting on social media of you all are hyping this up and everyone's hyper focused on this for no reason, but this is there's a long time to watch this, and I can understand that given that this is thousands of miles away that it may feel that way, but now in this case there are areas like Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands that are included in the cone, and it warrants keeping people in the loop. While yes, we like to see these positive trends, that's our job, is to keep you in the know as to what's happening in the Atlantic. And so that's just over the next few days. We are staying informed, but we're not freaking out about it, especially here in the mainland United States and the Eastern Seaboard. It's looking good and it's looking positive, but it also still warrants a casual check-in with the forecast, looking especially to this weekend.
Absolutely. Juliana, you made a good point there too. We're kind of in the watch and wait phase for the United States. However, the Northern Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, you guys are actually in the cone at this point. So Kristen, what do you suggest and have to say to those folks that are there? Because, if you're in the cone, you really should be really monitoring this at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about preparation, and now would be the time before we approach that peak season, heading into September and October. And even end of August, we've had some notoriously bad hurricanes approaching the 20-year anniversary of Katrina. So this would be the time, if you are in some of, those greater Antilles Islands or Puerto Rico, it's always a good reminder to those that the cone's only going to show you where the center goes, not where the impacts are. So if you're that close to the potential center in Puerto Rico, we definitely need to be paying attention to this and should just, mirror what Juliana was saying. This isn't, the time to freak out. This is the time to say, hey, this could be a danger, and this could be something that we really need to be preparing for this weekend. But it's also Tuesday. I've got some time to watch this and get my preparations and get my supplies. So that would be what I would tell those in that area. I would also, if you got vacations planned to maybe the Dominican Republic or Puerto Rico, it's also probably a good time to maybe call the travel agency. Is there any sort of, adjustments that can be made? You get there, because I actually had that conversation with a viewer here who said, I've got vacations to Cancun. Is this okay? And those worries we're also here for, right? Those questions that you guys are putting with the hashtags, that those are legitimate questions, because we'd rather give you too much information and you get that than not enough information.
Yeah, we always say we can't make the decision for you, but we can give you the details of what is going to happen, at least what we know. But if you have been on Tracking the Tropics before, you know that this is an interactive program, and Kristen, you just alluded to it. We answer your questions live here in real time. So use the hashtag. You can ask them in the comment section there, Facebook, TikTok. We're keeping an eye on it, and you can ask them. And just like this, we're going to put them on the screen. This one is from Lucid. Hashtag, hey, Amanda, could this hit Florida? So it's a great question, very valid question, right? And this is from TikTok. Could it hit Florida? The likelihood of that happening at this point is very low. However, we're not ruling that out at this point because it's so far out. We have time for those steering currents that we talked about. Those could change. Remember, we're looking 5 to 10 days out in the future that we're trying to predict what's happening. So could we see changes in the forecast? Yes. The likelihood right now looks on the lower side. Right now, we're in that watch and wait phase. Very low chances, but it's not out of the question. Nothing's out of the question 5 to 10 days out in a forecast. We got a next question coming in from Delamar saying, hashtag, hey, Juliana, will it hit Puerto Rico?
And very much the same answer exists here, while though in this case, the odds are not as low as answering that question for Florida and the United States, because Florida is included, or rather Puerto Rico is included now in the cone. And Kristen made a good point, and it's a good thing to remind, especially for folks that, maybe are new to a tropical environment and are not super familiar with the tropics and the forecast cone. So the forecast cone, and I repeat myself about this every hurricane season, shows where the center of the storm could possibly go. So the point of me reiterating that is that the center of the storm, the impacts of a hurricane extend, or a tropical system period, extend well outside of the center of that system. So if northern portions of Puerto Rico are included, and potentially, yes, the answer is this could potentially bring impacts and be a direct impact to Puerto Rico. It's right now, luckily, in the very, very outer edges of that cone, but it's not impossible to see that happen. And it's just a reminder that impacts can and will be felt well outside of the cone itself.
And our next question coming in from Darlene Tucker here. Hashtag, hey Amanda, hey Juliana, and hey Kristen. Any prediction about when the turn may happen if it does? Kristen, I'll send that one to you.
Yeah, it looks like at this point it would be after this weekend. So maybe early next week. You can kind of start to see that pivot a little bit Saturday, Sunday, not necessarily due west, but that west-northwest. But it's really going to try and hopefully at this point expected to get picked up by that western edge of that high pressure, that clockwise flow, the steering winds that we were showing you, that would drive it more towards the north. So again, that would maybe be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, given the forward speed that it's got right now, which again, it is moving pretty quickly through the Atlantic. And luckily it's not slowing down and gaining intensity, but the forecast with the category 3, that is a major hurricane, would be the first of the season. And even just kind of piggybacking off of the tone of the conversation, especially here in Texas, we've had a rough go with what was Tropical Storm Barry, giving us some of the most devastating flood we've had in quite some time. So we've been reiterating in our market and into those that we service as far as KXAN goes, is to not get hung up on the category 1s, 2s, and 3s. Where does the storm go and the speed of it? The strength is important, but it's not everything that we look at when it comes to a system. So that's something else that to hit on, and I think that is important, is you got to take every storm seriously, regardless if it's a tropical storm or a category 5 strength.
Yeah, we, reiterate that a lot here on Tracking the Tropics, because here in the Tampa Bay area, Kristen, we got hit by multiple systems last year, and I wouldn't even say hit because one storm was 100 miles offshore, but it brought huge impacts. And then we got hit a couple weeks later, a direct hit, which brought, a whole new suite of impacts to our area. So we're familiar with that. Category of the storm does not define the impacts that it will bring. Our next featured comment comes in from TikTok here. Hashtag, hey Amanda, will weaker goes west apply to ERIN, possibly delaying that turn to the north? Yes, it is possible. So that is a term that we use in the tropics. A weaker system will tend to travel west longer than a stronger system. A more organized, compact system will tend to recurve to the north a little bit faster. So a weaker system could take a little bit longer to make that turn to the north. That's why you see the spread in the models there, whether it takes a turn earlier on, a little bit farther to the east, or waits a little bit and makes that turn a little bit farther to the west, a little bit closer to the Bahamas, possibly, right? So those are fine details of the forecast that we're going to be watching for over the next 3 to 4 days. How fast does ERIN pick up strength in terms of those wind speeds, and how fast does it get organized, right? We are expecting that slow down in that forward motion, so you'll see that number, that west at 23 mile per hour, come down, but we'll be watching how fast it gets organized and how fast it picks up on those warmer waters. But yes, a weaker storm will tend to go a little bit farther to the west, but that doesn't necessarily mean that turn won't still happen. That depends on the steering currents that you're seeing on your screen there. Next question comes in to us from their Facebook, the Ariel Pretty Princess there, and hashtag, will it turn back and hit Miami or something? So there's a lot of if that questions, Kristen and Juliana, that we could answer, right? And there's just going to be a lot of that over the next 3 to 4 days, because there's just questions that we can't answer this far out. In general, we know that we are looking at the likelihood of that ridge that you're seeing on your screen break apart, allowing that escape alley. But Kristen, the likelihood of it kind of making a loop and kind of coming back toward Miami, low at this point.
Yeah, there's very little support right now for this getting into the Caribbean Sea or into the Gulf. I think this is definitely going to be on the other side of the eastern seaboard, staying in the Atlantic. And I know it's a big if of when does it make that curve to the north, and we are in that wait and watch phase. But you can see with the spaghetti plots there, each line indicating what a different computer thinks is going to happen with that storm. And most, if not all, take it to that northerly turn before it ever gets close to the eastern seaboard. And sometimes those big old ridges of high pressure, those summertime heat domes, they almost act as a brick wall. So we like when we see those kind of setting up on the eastern side. Yes, it gives way to hot, steamy, and stagnant conditions in the southeastern states, but at least it prevents some of these hurricanes from getting close. It almost acts like a bowling ball, right? A billiard ball that would keep it out over the open Atlantic. Now, obviously, we've got a very vested interest in Bermuda, which sits right there in the middle of those computer models and that spaghetti plot. That would be an area to absolutely watch as well, in addition to Puerto Rico and some of those those greater Antilles Islands there.
Yeah, Kristen, you talked about that heat dome. We're in the middle of that forecast, looking at Thursday, Friday, and Saturday for the Tampa Bay area. Juliana and I have been forecasting 95, 96 with that high humidity. It's going to be brutal around here. But again, that heat dome that is building over us will more than likely kind of steer this one off to the north. So next featured comment coming in from TikTok saying, #Hey Amanda, could Saharan Dust interact with this system? You know, that's actually a really interesting question, because it's kind of surrounded by a lot of dry air right now and that Saharan dust, and it's going to be with it as it moves off to the west. But most of our forecast models indicate that this is going to take more advantage of those warmer waters that it's going to be moving into than the dust is going to hinder it. The dust is likely going to thin out, and that's pretty typical for this time of year. Would you say, Juliana and Kristen, that August we typically see a little less dust to help us out?
Exactly. No, I agree with you 100%. So it's kind of that, thick plume of it that it's enveloped with or enveloped by right now in the eastern Atlantic. And then the farther west it goes, the kind of literally starts to leave the Saharan dust behind a little bit. And like you said, it thins out quite a bit. And there you go. So that's a visual of how and that's likely, they mentioned drier air, the cooler waters right now, and as well just the lack of organization. And you can see how that really does thin out where that area of circulation goes beyond the National Hurricane Center's forecast in the next several days. That's looking to next Monday, Tuesday, and then there. So again, that I agree with you 100%. And that's very normal. Throughout the month of August, we see a steep drop in how much dust rolls off of Africa.
Yeah, we like those summer months where we see that Saharan dust. #Hey Amanda from Brandon Mills here. I leave on Sunday out of Miami on a 6-day cruise through the Bahamas. Do you think it will impact our cruise? It's definitely possible, but let's throw up the forecast cone on the screen here. You said you leave on Sunday. Was that the comment?
Sunday.
So you'll be headed toward the Bahamas there on Sunday, and you'll be there for quite some time. Your first couple of days probably won't be impacted, so that's some good news. But we talked about that weaker goes west trend. If it is a little bit weaker and makes that curve a little bit later, then it could possibly impact your cruise there. But I think the good thing about the cruise lines is they're watching this as well, and if they need to, make a change of port or change to your itinerary, they might, and they're going to do that with all the caution in the world for sure. But hopefully you can get to maybe some of those outer islands after it recurves off to the north. Sounds like a fun time, though.
Exactly. Oh, man, that's awesome.
Katie L. from TikTok saying, "Hey, Kristen, will it hit the Dominican Republic?"
Yeah, it's one of those things where we wish you could give the definitive answer of yes. As we've been talking about, we're looking now a good 5-6 days out. So things could change. Is it a possibility? Yes. Is it a guarantee? No. I mean, at this point, it's going to get close this weekend, and we'll know more in the coming days, but it's not something I would change plans off of yet. I would just say keep monitoring it. We're going to know more, especially because, Juliana alluded to this earlier in the stream. This isn't a very pretty looking storm right now on satellite imagery. It's being torn up. It's not in a very conducive environment right now. So it's going to go looking from this kind of shaggy mess of thunderstorms and showers to probably a pretty well-defined, it's got that inner circulation already, but that a little bit more what we think of as a visual tropical storm hurricane once it does get closer to some of those Caribbean islands. So, as far as any guarantees, we can't make those decisions just yet because we're so far out. But it is a possibility at this moment that we could maybe get sideswiped in some of those Caribbean islands.
Absolutely. And I want to reiterate, this is pretty normal this time of the year, that tropical activity really ramping up now that we're getting into the middle of August, peak hurricane season there, September 10th, and we're right on cue with these first few storms developing. And Juliana, you made this graphic as well. Kristen, you talked about it earlier. The first hurricane this season on average is August 11th. And hey, we're right about there, but the first major hurricane doesn't typically happen until September 1st. That could happen a little bit earlier. I think, as we've seen, though, in past seasons, we know that things happen a little earlier than what we typically see on our averages map. Not necessarily an indication of what we're going to see for the rest of the season, but we are still, Kristen, forecasting that above average season.
Absolutely. The ingredients are there, and a lot of the different agencies that we rely on, Hurricane Center, Colorado State University, NOAA, they're all expecting the above average season, as am I. I think, it's just a matter of tracking these storms as they come and not letting our guard down. A lot of people, I think, were thinking, hey, it kind of seems like a slow start. We've only had a few tropical storms here and there, but as you just showed, there's a lot of season left to go. So we just want to make sure everybody doesn't get that sleepiness to this.
Absolutely. And, when we see the next name storm form, that name will be Fernand. We do have that on the list. But at this point in time, lots of eyes on Erin, and they will be for the foreseeable week, all the way into early next week. Lots of time to talk about Erin. You're going to see it all over social media again. And we're going to be tracking it here on Tracking the Tropics as well. We're going to be here with you on the updates. We're going to be here answering your questions, especially if there's any major shifts east or west or anything with the cone. We know you guys want to see those, and we know that you guys have questions with that as well. But I think that is going to about wrap it up for this edition of Tracking the Tropics. Kristen, I want to thank you so much for joining us and being our featured meteorologist today.
Of course. Thank you all so much for having me.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll see you again for the rest of the season. We got a long ways to go. Again, we are tracking Tropical Storm Erin. Juliana, for myself, that'll wrap it up. We will be here on future episodes of Tracking the Tropics with the latest details on Tropical Storm Erin, what is likely to become at least our first hurricane of the season, if not major hurricane, in the coming days. We'll see you then.